Welcome to Narratives Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome Deroy and Julienne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks Live, stories that shaped us. I'm Julienne Ryan, and I'm going to be joined by my co-host Jerome Deroy in a moment. And we're so grateful you've chosen to spend the part of your day with us, whether you're joining live or watching later to explore the power of storytelling in leadership and connection. This event has been a long time in the making, and we're so excited to bring it to life with you. A huge thank you to our three guest storytellers, Cecilia Loving, Charles Bernard, and Lisa Hope Tilstra. Thank you for preparing your stories and taking the time to be with us today. During this session, you're going to see all of us on the screen together. That's intentional, so our storytellers can see who's listening, and so you, our audience, can feel part of the conversation. And even if you're tuning in from home or your office, your listening matters just as much. So we invite you to take a moment now to set aside distractions, close your email tabs, silence your notifications, and give yourself permission to be fully present for the next 45 minutes. Your listening is what gives these stories life. And welcome, Jerome Deroy. I've been waiting for my co-host and partner in crime.
Nothing like a live event to keep you on
Oh,
your toes.
yes.
Well, thanks very much for that intro, Julienne. And as you said, I'm Jerome Deroy. Julienne's given you all the background that you need to know. So how the event's going to flow. Thanks everyone for being here today. Really appreciate you all taking the time for just showing up at this live event. This is how it's going to go. So each storyteller is going to share a personal 6-minute story, up to 6 minutes, and then we'll have a time to reflect on those stories. And this is where you, the audience, can chime in. So we welcome your questions, your comments, any reflections that you have about the stories, and we'll bring those up in that moment of reflection between storytellers. And then after, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching this later on, I also want to acknowledge you all who registered but weren't able to be here live. Welcome to you, and you'll also be able to get notes on the recorded version of this that will come out on January 19th. So finally, we're going to wrap up at 12:45 p.m. Eastern. And at this time, we will be closing out and wrapping up and giving you a few things to think about on your way back to your home office or wherever you are in the world. All right. I think, is there anything else that I might have missed, Julian?
No, now we get to introduce our storytellers.
Okay, fantastic. So I want to introduce our first storyteller, who's someone that I've known for quite a long time now. Her name is Cecilia Loving. Maybe we could bring Cecilia on the screen. There we go. Hello, Cecilia, and welcome. Thanks so much for being here. I'll say a few words about you before you tell your story. So Cecilia is a people and culture leader, and she's the author of Connecting Through Circles, among many other books. So definitely look her up and look up her books. We'll remind you of what those are. I met Cecilia personally when she was at the New York City Fire Department as a senior vice president. And working with her was honestly one of the highlights of my career. I can really say that. It was we did a few events together, had wonderful storytellers, had a chance to hear some of Cecilia's stories as well. And really, she's kind of a model for me in terms of how to conduct yourself in the workplace and a true people person. And so I'm excited to hear her story that goes at the heart of many things that I know our listeners care about. And so we're gonna now hear your story, Cecilia.
Thank you so
Oh,
much, Jerome.
and sorry, as I'm seeing Cecilia, our other storytellers come up. I just want to say a few words just to acknowledge both of you, Lisa and Charles. The order is going to go like this. We're going to start with Cecilia, then we'll go to Lisa Hope Tilstra, and then finally Charles Bernard. And so I'll get a chance to say a few words about, or we'll get a chance to say a few words about each of you right before you step onto this virtual stage to tell your stories. So without further ado, let's go to the story of Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Jerome, and thank you, Julianne. And I'm really feel great about being here to share, and especially to be present also for Charles and Lisa's stories. When I think of leadership, I am actually reminded of one of the first birthday parties that was ever planned for me. Everything was just totally magically transformed. My 4 brothers were running around organizing, pin the tail on the donkey, and hot dogs and punch, and of course, birthday cake. But there was one problem. Nobody came to my party. Now, in Detroit, in the inner city where I lived, all of the kids walked out of school in protest, even at the elementary school where I was. Not a single person showed up for my party because it was the day that King was assassinated, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, I should add that Rosa Parks was my mother's sewing teacher. And while my mother never learned to sew, she learned a lot about civil rights that she all of the no-shows. We had already, as kids, experienced the Detroit riots in 67, the assassination of a president and his brother, of Malcolm X. And so on that day, I felt the importance of sacrifice, but not my sacrifice, Dr. King's, how he gave his life for what he believed in, a beloved community. On this day, today is actually Dr. King's birthday. I am reminded that he said the ultimate measure of a leader is not where he stands in moments of convenience and comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. He said, we can't lead anybody until we first accept ourselves. Now, as I grew older, I realized that accepting ourselves is not as easy as it sounds. Taking the road less traveled, speaking up when everybody else is quiet, standing strong instead of capitulating, confronting our own challenges can actually be the most difficult things, but in many respects, it's also one of the most liberating things that we can do. As I often say, faith is not faith unless it's tested. And one of my biggest tests actually came 30 years later when I had to leave the comfort zone of a marriage that didn't work after 15 years. Leave a partner on Wall Street, a house in the Hamptons, and the pretense of being content when I was actually miserable. It took years for me to summon the courage to say, you know what? We can do this with hatred or we can do this with love. And fortunately, we chose to part with love. And so it wasn't until my 10th or 20th or even my 30th, but at 40 years, I had my next birthday party. And I called it my coming out party. And let me tell you, everybody showed up. At what was then the Hudson River Club, which was on the water in lower Manhattan. And the theme on my little RSVP cards was leap and the net will appear. And so I greeted folks with the shame. that I was dealing with, the fact that I was divorced. I realized at that time that the most challenging person that you can lead is yourself. By leaping, I was able to hear and be obedient to what the universe was calling me to do. I stopped practicing law. I went to seminary. I became a published author. A happier marriage found me. I was ordained to lead positive and holistic workplaces where everybody could be seen and heard and valued. And I finally knew that the promised land that Dr. King spoke of is not a destination, it's a shift in consciousness to courage over comfort, love over hatred, strength over stress. As I like to say, nobody and nothing can take our good from us, but also peace over politics. It means faith over fear. And for me, that's really what leadership is. It doesn't begin outside of ourselves. What I learned is that it's not about telling somebody else what to do. No, beloved, it really begins within. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah. Great. So I want to remind all our everyone's you can now unmute yourselves if you haven't done so already. And that includes, yeah, exactly. So now I can see that everybody's unmuted. So here's how it's going to work. First, I'd love to say a few words just to acknowledge you, Cecilia, and the courage it took to tell your story today. And also just to say to thank you for this great reminder that today is Martin Luther King's birthday, um, as well as on Monday it will be the day that we celebrate that birthday. And what that reminded me of course, is that you and I, Cecilia, worked a couple of times while you were at the New York City Fire Department on precisely Martin Luther King Day events, reminding everyone of his principles. And I think you said it beautifully in your story, love versus hatred. You brought that into your life in terms of your relationship and leaving that relationship. That's how you chose to be. And that came directly. I remember that those principles from those events that you created at the time. So it's really great to hear, you know, how you've actually kind of walked that talk essentially, and the the combination of your story with these principles and some of the quotes that you told us about, or his philosophies. So just thank you for bringing that onto the stage today and into this circle of storytelling, because I think it's just a wonderful reminder. Julianne, any comments you might have?
Seconding everything you said, and you just touched my heart, and just powerful story, and all those amazing connections of history and time, and simple message. It starts with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just someone, Derek on YouTube, said, highlighted begin within, a helpful, mindful mantra. So yeah, thank you for that. Curious if Charles or Lisa, you have any reflections you want to bring in here?
I'm so grateful to hear your story, Cecilia, and I just will say briefly, I feel inspired to sit up a little bit straighter, stand up straighter, and be that leader that I know I can, and to speak up when it needs to be spoken, and just to stand in the the space that I have. And thank you so much for that inspiration.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can echo that, Lisa. Great story, Cecilia. Um, it was really good, and I was taking some notes, and I wrote down something I'd heard recently in a podcast, because I love to listen to podcasts, and especially if there's an inspiration message attached to it. And one that your story reminded me of is the host said, "As within, so without."
Mm.
And it's like your outside world is a reflection of your inside world. And that seemed to be, for me at least, in listening to your story, a constant throughout the story. And love the references to Dr. King, Rosa Parks, icons in our country. And anytime I hear someone reference them, I know they're a good person at heart.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to let this, these are great reflections. Thank you so much because I'd love to let our audience in on some of these storytelling techniques, and you've just mentioned one, Charles, where you're bringing something in, like quotes or a famous person's life, a historical person's life, and even if you may not have, a direct relationship with them, it's great when you can do that in your stories and see. Then we get to see the audience how that person has inspired you, and of course, you've got that connection, Cecilia, because that was your birthday when he was assassinated. And so to actually witness that as a child, we can only imagine as an audience member what that must have been like. But you brought us into that world. And I think that's what we can do as storytellers. Even if I wasn't anywhere, I wasn't even born when that happened. And my background is completely different. I grew up in France, etc, but that's a name that I know because of history, right? And what we can do as storytellers is you can bring us into your purview as a child, and we can all relate to that because we've all been a child at some moment where something happened that was shocking to us, whether that was the assassination of a historical figure or something else that was just as shocking for us, but something that brought kind of the burst our bubble as children, really, and we hope that that never happens, especially if we're parents, right? But of course that is going to happen, and so when you bring us into that world, it just allows our audience to see who you are from a different perspective. So I always highlight when someone shows themselves as a child in their story because it's just so relatable. So I would just encourage our audience to, find those historical people that are inspiring to you. Maybe there's a way for you to bring them into your story to show how they inspired you, and then also find a way to bring to show us a little bit who you were as a child, because so many of the things from childhood we bring into adulthood, and even in the way that we think about things and that we behave, et cetera, as leaders. So the more you become aware of that, the better leader you will be. I really believe that. Okay, so without further ado, that's my lesson for the day. We will now move on to our next storyteller. I'll let Julienne introduce Lisa.
Thank you. And just to make one more comment, that story was the example of how context matters in relating to people and building trust and empathy. So next, we're going to hear from Lisa Hope Tilstra, a global emotional intelligence expert and master trainer. Lisa's work and her podcast, Make Life Less Difficult, remind us of empathy and emotion are essential to leadership. They're not distractions. Her story begins to show us how vulnerability can become strength. Thank you and welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Julian and Jerome. Just a real brief note before I share my story. This is a story that includes loss and grief. And as I share, I may experience some emotions. You, as listeners, might feel some emotions come up for you. And I just want to invite you to take care of yourself as needed if you do feel emotion, and know that even if you see the emotion present for me, I am so grateful to share this story with you today. Hey, buddy, you have a big mass in your head. It starts in the left frontal lobe, crosses over the corpus callosum, and is also on the right side. Those were the words of the ER doctor breaking the news to us. The ER doc with no bedside manner. My husband had a brain tumor. This diagnosis came 9 months after we married. Everyone warns of that notorious first year of marriage, and we had no idea how right they were. I remember so distinctly the day that Eric was diagnosed. We were staying at his mom's house in Tennessee for a few days. It was late July 2000, and we were at the start of what felt like a luxurious 3-week vacation. Life had been really stressful over the summer. I was in graduate school and working 2 part-time jobs. Eric was working full-time as a nurse and part-time as a farm manager at a camp. We were newlyweds under a lot of stress and pressure. And I'd always been told that newlyweds fought. I thought we just needed a vacation. The day we went to the hospital, Eric had a headache that he couldn't get rid of, and his back hurt. It wasn't terribly unusual for him to have a headache or a backache, but I was annoyed. His aches and pains were putting a crimp in our vacation. I was ready to get out and do something. When Eric got up from his nap, I was ready to head into town, but I sensed something was off when Eric handed me the keys to the car and he said, "Take me to the ER." I looked at him quizzically, but went ahead and got my shoes and my purse. We arrived at the emergency room, registered, and sat down to wait and wait and wait. We sat waiting for 3 hours. A couple hours in, I thought, maybe I should go and remind the nurse at intake that my husband is complaining of a terrible headache. Can't these sometimes be serious problems where people just drop dead? But then I looked over at Eric and I thought, it can't be anything that bad. He looks normal. He's just uncomfortable from his headache. Eric was a nurse. He worked in a neurosurgical intensive care unit at a university hospital that was renowned for its brain research and top brain surgeons. I didn't ask Eric what he was thinking as we sat in the emergency room, and he didn't offer to share. He must have been worried, though. Finally, we get called back to the exam room. The doctor examines Eric, asks some questions, and then informs us that it appears that Eric has a really bad sinus headache. He told us that Eric could take some pain medicine and we were free to go home. At this, Eric looked straight in the eyes of the doctor and he calmly replied, "Yeah, it sort of feels like a really bad sinus headache, but I'm an ICU nurse and I don't come to the ER for sinus headaches. So could we do a CT scan of my head?" I had no idea why Eric asked for the scan, but I sat and I waited while he was taken to get the CT scan done. The tech brought him back and we waited again. And it was 15, 20 minutes later that the ER doc made his pronouncement. It was quite dramatic. He walked in, he's holding up the films of the CT scan in his left hand. He's holding up to the light and pointing out the tumor in his right hand and announcing with way, way too much enthusiasm that Eric had a large mass in his head. He looked over at me and he asked, "Do you understand all that or do you want your husband to translate?" An hour later or so, the neurosurgeon arrived, and I do not remember what he told us, but I remember thinking he was a much, much nicer person. I wasn't sure what it all meant. What exactly is meant by a mass? The word tumor would come later, but for the time being, I used the word mass as I called his mom and then my sister. Eric was given some pain medicine through an IV, and shortly after that, he became drowsy. They admitted him to the hospital overnight so that he could have an MRI first thing in the morning, and I stayed the night with him. There was some kind of bench in the hospital room along the one wall, and I remember laying there and trying to take it all in. Eric was asleep, the phone rang. It was our friend Kyle, a colleague of Eric's in the neurosurgical ICU. Kyle insisted we return to Florida because we could get much better care than there in Tennessee where we were. I told him I appreciate so much the guidance and that we should talk again in the morning. I had never spent the night in a hospital before. I wasn't quite sure what to do with myself, so I decided I'd take a shower. I walked out to the nurse's station and asked if I could have some shampoo. I saw them glance sideways at me, but it didn't really register in the moment. Much later, I wondered, were they annoyed with me? What did I think? Was this like a hotel? Or perhaps they looked at me with pity, the young innocent bride whose world had just been turned upside down. In the shower, I let the hot water run and run and run. Maybe, just maybe, I could wash away this reality. Maybe when I dried off, everything would be back to normal. But it wasn't. Normal ended that day. I learned Eric's tumor would be terminal in May of 2004, not from Eric's doctors, but from my new landlord, who just happened to be the head of radiology at the hospital. That's another story for another day. Eric passed away in February of 2005, 21 years ago next month. The shapes created by this entire experience are ones of grief, of love, loss, growth, community, and grace. Throughout the 5.5 years from diagnosis to passing, Eric and I were surrounded with the love and support of our families and friends. They poured out their love on us in amazing ways. And even with the difficulty, I am grateful for the shape that I am because of this chapter in my life.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Beautiful story, and thanks for sharing it here. I feel like as the audience, we can maybe invite the audience to just take a collective breath after a story like this one. I invite all of us to do that too, just as a way to acknowledge the story and let it sink in. And you know, I know you've told this story before. You even told it on our podcast in some form, right? But I remember you, Lisa, telling me when we were preparing for this event that you were kind of looking at it from a slightly different angle. I wonder what it was like for you to now having shared this. What was that like to share it? You know, I know you've told the story in some form many, many times, but what was it like for you today?
As you had invited me to be part of this event, Jerome, the theme of stories that shaped us, there were a lot of things that came to my mind. And I was like, is this a story to tell? It can be heavy, it can be emotional. But I was like, wow, if there's ever a day in my life that shaped me moving forward, it's this one. And so it was really a gift to look at the story again through this lens of how it shaped me. And
Mm,
I I feel like it's a gift to honor Eric, that he continues to shape my life, even though he's no longer here with me physically, and it's been a couple of decades, like, his influence, the experiences that we went together through, I mean, it just all continues to shape who I am as a leader, as a human, and I am grateful again for those shapes.
mm. Wow, amazing way to take something as
Mhm.
momentous as that and turn it into something positive for yourself.
Mhm.
Wonderful. And I really encourage everybody, there's a little banner on our screen right now to learn more about Lisa's work because not only has that story influenced her, but it also makes her the great coach that she is. And this wonderful podcast, Make Life Less Difficult, I really recommend everyone look for that because Julian and I had the immense pleasure of being on it, and we had such a deep conversation. And that's who Lisa is. She doesn't have do half measures in terms of conversations. You'll go right into it, and we get to the heart of it. And I think that's a real skill and talent that you have, Lisa. So I recommend everyone shows up and checks out your work more. Any, yeah, of course. Julianne, any reflections you wanted to bring to the table?
I'm just appreciating, and I'm going to allow my two panelists to speak because like I said, like Jerome said, we've had the honor of talking to you before and being part of your story on many occasions, and this event shapes the story in a new way.
Mm.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is just powerful. It was just such an incredibly powerful and moving story for which I am grateful. And it also underscored for me the importance of detail because I was with you right there in the hospital and I was with you on that bench. I was with you when the doctor came out, well, the person who had the very poor bedside manner to make that announcement, and I'm grateful for you and grateful for your journey and the strength that you've shown And I can't wait to tune in and make life less difficult. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I felt the same way like you, Cecilia. I was in the story. I was really moved by your shower metaphor because, you know, you wanted to wash off the pain, and when you were done and dry, you wanted to kind of hope that everything would go back to normal. And so that was very vivid. And I don't know your work. We're meeting basically for the first time, but I think when you tell us a powerful story, like Cecilia said, it's very powerful. You don't need to spend a lot of time getting to know someone. You can get to know someone very quickly. And what struck me is, and again, forgive me because I don't know your work. I'm making some assumptions that, you know, you're doing stuff to ease suffering for people so that makes life um, less difficult. You know, you focus on EQ, I think is what I heard. And it reminds me of just something I believe, and I'm not saying what I believe is true. I just, for me, it's true that if you really trust a great coach who's going to help you with something important like easing your suffering, that person needs to have suffered. And so it's very clear to me that by being vulnerable and putting out something that's really very personal and very traumatic, that as a listener and potentially as a client, hearing that makes me make that instant connection that you're not preaching techniques or things that aren't true for you, that this actually is something that seems to come from the heart because you've gone through it yourself.
Mm, Thank you so much for that, Charles.
Yeah, beautifully said. I have nothing to add to what Cecilia and Charles said because that is, I agree with all of that. And I think that's exactly why we tell stories in this way, to make that connection more quickly, to have those details that bring you into the story, like you said, Cecilia. You know, yeah, all of those things I noticed in your story. So really well done, and thanks for sharing that. All right, so I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our final storyteller. I can't believe how quickly the time is going by. It's amazing. That's always the case when we're listening to stories. So our final storyteller is Charles Bernard, sales improvement expert, keynote speaker, founder of Criteria for Success in Calavia. I've known Charles for more than 15 years at this point, I believe. He was one of our first champions of this whole listening and storytelling method that we have at Narrative, the company. And his stories have always been filled with wisdom and trust and resilience and what it means to lead with authenticity. So I'm really delighted that you showed up and answered the call for telling a story today, Charles. So without further ado, let's bring you up onto the virtual stage.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Jerome. I feel the same way. We've known each other a long time, and you're really a big part of a lot of my ideas about how to tell a story, especially in a sales context. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Julienne, too, for inviting me. We've gotten to know each other as well quite a bit. My story is not really a child; it's more an adolescent story. I'm 19 in the story, uh, but before I tell the story, it reminded me of something that I grew up in the UK. So I'm from England originally. That's where the accent is from. And shortly after arriving in the US, I went to a transformational uh, workshop. Now, growing up in the UK, if you use those words, people would just look at you with a blank stare. Transformational what? What does that mean? And it was called the S training. I had no idea what to expect, but I remember something that stuck with me forever, and it was just one line. And the one line was, at any moment, you can transform the quality of your life. And I sort of feel that this story is an example of that. So think of me at 19 in school, and throughout my career in school, throughout my educational time in school, I was a mediocre student at best. And the Brits can sometimes be pretty blunt, especially, if you get certain types of teachers. And my report cards were consistently the same message. And it was could do better, should do better, must do better. Charles could do better. And I remember I dreaded having to discuss my report card with my parents. And in a way, I was kind of deeply moved, um, more because they didn't yell at me, like, "What's this report card saying? You could do better." They were just quiet. They were just kinda like they'd read the card, and I'd wait for a reaction, and I really didn't get one. And so I was left inventing my own, uh, thoughts about what they were thinking, and it always came back to disappointment. I was a disappointment. I was disappointing my parents. And this continued. Um, I was always a crammer. That's kinda how I got how I got by in school. Like, I would get okay grades, and I would kind of slide until the last moment, and then I'd cram, and somehow I'd pull it out at the very end. And there was this one time where I was in need of clinching an additional O level. So in England, we had O levels and A levels. Some of you may be familiar with that. And so I needed to get 6 O levels so I could get accepted into the A level, which is the advanced track. Kind of something I didn't even think was possible. But then lo and behold, I've got my 5 and I got to clinch this extra one. And the assignment, it was at the end of the term, um, was a 5-page essay. No further direction. Like there wasn't a topic, there wasn't something they wanted in the essay. It was free form. And I remember vividly being in that classroom. We had our own desks separated, and the teacher would walk up and down. You can imagine, like, probably you've been through stuff like that. And I'm in my head thinking and overanalyzing, how am I going to impress, etc. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this voice comes into my head and it whispers, "Let go." And so I heard this voice and I interpreted that as permission. And so I started writing. And the more I wrote, the more it just continued to flow. And I remember the words were just coming out in the right order, in the right paragraphs, in the right punctuation. It was almost like an out of body experience. And I remember some things very vividly. One was a big spot at the top of my head, which is where all my thoughts were gathering, and like a channel going from my head to my pencil, where all the ideas were exploding out on the paper. And the other thought was like Michelangelo seeing the statue trapped inside of the marble is like, I know what I want to talk about. And I just said to myself, I'm not writing for a score. I'm not writing to clinch my O level position. I'm writing because I really want to write this story. And it was about an old lady who was very lonely, and her highlight of her day was when the milkman came to deliver milk, and the few words, brief words they exchanged consoled her. It was kind of like her way of being okay with being where she was in her life. She had a cat, Siamese, Siri.
1 minute.
Thank you. And then it started to wrap up. And then it was over. And I remember I had tears in my eyes because in my mind, said, I just wrote something good. And a few days later, they posted the results, and I was top of the class. So I clinched the O level, and I was top of the class for that semester with that essay. People were kind of surprised, but no one was more surprised than me. And the moral for me has been since that time that when I lead people, I really think that there is that potential trapped, like it was in me, in the team, and I really need to give people that opportunity to express the potential, like I gave myself.
Mm, wonderful. Thank you so much. And what a great way also to kind of bring it all together at the end as well. I just want to say one thing, because when you said that how this relates to your leadership, and if people want to learn more, we should bring up that banner about Charles's work. Thank you. And you know, how it ties to what you see in people is potential, the potential trapped, right? And immediately that image that you told us about so beautifully, Michelangelo, there's a sculpture trapped in this huge piece of marble, and he can see that. So I thought that's just a beautiful image, that you brought together for us, and I could kind of, even as you were talking about this, and also the image of the thought, right here and going right into the tip of the pencil and onto the page. These are all great techniques for everyone who's listening, to find those images that really stick with you. I don't think I'm going to, be forgetting this anytime soon. Those two particular images. So thanks for that. Any other reflections from our colleagues here? Yeah, Juliet.
I always think it's magical and there's synchronicity about when we share stories, how there's a common thread that comes in unintentionally. Your story talks about letting the inner out, as did Cecilia, as did Lisa. And it was about taking literally that leap of faith to show up and be vulnerable and do everything we talk about all the time. So thank you. And then with Charles, I was in that classroom with you and I could see those little blue books and I'm sitting there going, I bet he has really neat handwriting. That was always the bane of my existence. So that relatability is very key. And also like that took some courage after all those naysayers around you or quiet naysayers, and then you probably carrying a lot of those no's with you. So wonderful moment. Thank you so much.
I also wanted to quickly say that in my spiritual tradition, there is a saying, finding a way out of no way. And that's what came up for me. And the three things that you lifted up really resonated with me. One is the surrender, letting go, and just the power of being able to shift and change in an instant who you are, but also just that energy and dynamic of trust. And I'm so grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, Charles, I'll just say really briefly that at any moment you can transform quality of life. So powerful to remember. And then that letting go, it was a trusting of yourself
Mm.
that was the transformation. And that's such a powerful reminder of, okay, when I know like there's something core deep in my core, hey, trust it, let it go, and let it transform me and the situation. Thank you so much for sharing.
Great feedback. Thank you.
Beautifully said. And look at that. We are right at time. Just to conclude here, I just want to read these two comments that just came in onto YouTube here. Gina says, moments when we are surprised by our own and others' positive potential are so special. And then Derek again said, the story form about the form of an essay that tapped into creativity was a thrilling reminder to let go. So that's just a few comments here that have been coming here on YouTube. We will be putting all of this together as a recording for you all who are listening here today. If you want to catch it again, or maybe you missed the beginning, or at some point you had to go, you will get this recording on January 19, everybody, through its usual form on our podcast, Leadership Story Talks, as well as this very YouTube channel here. That'll be ready on Monday, January 19th, which is a great way to remind us and celebrate of Martin Luther King's life, because that will be MLK Day. So thank you everyone again for joining us. Thanks to our esteemed storytellers, Lisa Hope Tilstra, Cecilia Loving, and Charles Bernard. Thanks to my co-host, Julienne.
Thank you.
Julienne has a book. I'm going to put that onto the screen right now. Let's go ahead and put that on. If you want to find her book anywhere you find books, That's a great way to learn more about us as well. Another way to make sure that you don't miss anything that's coming up is to subscribe to our mailing list at narrative.com, NARATIV.com. That's on your screen right now. And finally, save the date because we're going to do this again. We're doing this every third Thursday, every other month. So our next one will be March 19. So save the date, and we'll have 3 brand new storytellers. And that will just go on for the whole year and possibly longer. So very excited. Absolutely. Very excited for this. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Julienne, for being my wonderful co-host.
It's a joy. Thank you, everyone.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.